Discussion items. We have two this evening, both being led by Assistant Superintendent Chamberlain. Start the first one, which is the City of Minneapolis Above the Falls Policy Review.
President Irwin, Commissioners, as you know, as we've been undertaking the River First project along the river corridor in the upper river, the City of Minneapolis has also been looking at the land use policies and the land use basis for the river corridor as well. Both of these efforts are really rooted in the Above the Falls small area plan that's part of the city's comprehensive plan, and the Above the Falls Regional Park Master Plan that is our open space and park master plan. What we intend to do in the near future is to recommend to this body that we reintegrate the work that the city has been doing and the work that we've been doing into an update to the Above the Falls plan. We thought it would be prudent and good for you to hear some of the work that's been going on the policy review study that's being undertaken by the City of Minneapolis. And to talk about that is Tom Layton with the Community Planning and Economic Development Department at the city. So I'd like to invite Tom to come forward and give us a little bit of a review of the efforts that he's had underway regarding the land use and zoning issues on the upper river and Above the Falls area. Tom.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you for your interest in this topic. And I also want to thank you for your own very good work on the city's upper riverfront here with your River First project. Let's see if I can open up my presentation. I've been told to keep it to 10 minutes, and I will work my best to do that.
So this one?
That's right. Thank you. All right. So with Bruce's help, we've boiled this down to a very simple agenda. What is the Above the Falls Policy Review and Implementation Study? And I have to say I'm a little jealous of the Minneapolis Riverfront Development Initiative because you've boiled that down to River First. And I still have a 7-word acronym I'm working with here. But so Above the Falls Policy Review and Implementation Study, and why are we doing it? What are the key findings and recommendations that we have arrived on to date, and what's its connection with the work that you all have been doing? So as Bruce said, our starting point together really is the Above the Falls plan, which is the guiding policy document for both of our organizations, the City of Minneapolis and the Park Board. It was approved by both organizations in 2000. It's a very comprehensive and integrated vision that that speaks to both public improvements along the riverfront, parks and trails, as well as guidance for private development along the riverfront. Now, the impetus for the Above the Falls Policy Review was the adoption of the land use guidance from the Above the Falls plan into the city's comprehensive plan in 2008. And at that point in time, the land use guidance was incorporated into a deeper layer of city policy, which is as it should be. But it also, I think, surfaced some concerns that some city council members have been experiencing about that plan. If you'll notice the area outlined in blue, this is related to the development guidance. This is the area where over the long run, the policy in the Above the Falls plan calls for these industrial areas to be redeveloped as residential neighborhoods. And if you can get a sense of scale here, that goes from around 22nd Avenue North all the way up to the city limits on the west side of the river. So we're talking about an extensive area of land, very ambitious redevelopment vision. So the concerns on the part of the City Council were, A, in a time where there's increasing emphasis on the value of jobs, is that the right policy balance between industrial land and residential land? And B, is it realistic? Do we have a feasible implementation path for this? So they directed staff to, well, I'll say to and C, to the extent that an ambitious redevelopment is still part of city policy, when we're done with this exercise, can we get a better strategy for going through that process and making that happen? So that's essentially the charge to staff at this point. That's what we're trying to do in this project. So I'm going to go right to the punchline and say that in January, we believe, or thereabouts, we expect to be going to the City Council with a recommendation that, yes, there are some modifications in terms of the land use guidance that we think ought to be done to the Above the Falls plan. And those would include modifications to land use and modifications to the character of development on the upper riverfront, as well as a more detailed and explicit implementation strategy. Now, as Bruce alluded to, our expectation at that point in time would be that we could use that opportunity of updating this policy document to incorporate whatever elements of the River First plan need to be incorporated so that they become formal policy of the City of Minneapolis, ultimately the Metropolitan Council, the Park Board, the Regional Parks Plan, and so on, and you can pursue the implementation of those elements as well. I'm going to talk very briefly about just a few of the key findings. We have done hours and hours of research, market-based, based on characteristics of the land, utility infrastructure, transportation. I'm going to just talk about some land use recommendations and very briefly allude to some of what I mean by development character in these recommendations. So this is a base map we've been using to talk about land use recommendations, and you can see it divides the upper riverfront into some sub-areas. The background colors relate to the existing policy guidance in the Above the Falls plan, whether that's residential, industrial, or mixed use. Again, I've outlined the blue areas that would essentially be new neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods in our existing policy, and you'll see that there are a couple of different colors that simply relate to whether they would be exclusively residential or whether they would be residential with some other commercial development mixed in. So this is the base map we're utilizing, and another thing I want to call your attention to is the dashed green line that runs along the river. That symbolizes the fact that we expect there to be a public edge along the riverfront. We don't have exact boundaries for that, or didn't put exact boundaries for that on this map because we're a little bit between policy guidance on that. We could have put on the boundaries in the Above the Falls plan, or we could have put on the River First boundaries, but that's somewhat flux. So we're just representing that it's there, and our concern with development guidance is what happens adjacent to that. How do we guide that public or that private development? So very briefly, in the blue outlined areas, in other words, in many areas of the upper riverfront, our research leads us to the conclusion that the existing policy in the Above the Falls plan for land use and development ought to be affirmed. There's some caveats to that, some minor nuances to that, but for the most part, these are areas we think that the policy can be supported by our research so far. In this slide, you can see that there are two areas in the upper riverfront where our research is leading us to believe that policy guidance may have gone too far. These are areas that are existing industrial, and the Above the Falls plan, they were to become a new part of these new residential neighborhoods. They have strong characteristics for industrial, and there are some concerns we would have in both these instances about them becoming or guiding them towards residential, which we can talk about if you'd like. And finally, there's a few of these sub-areas where we're finalizing our research essentially over the next month, and we expect to have recommendations for the City Council on these areas. They are the small area that this building is a part of, and that Riverview Homes is a part of, and then essentially everything at Lowry Avenue and North, where the city's Upper Harbor Terminal is. Those are areas that have stronger characteristics for residential redevelopment, and warrant us taking a close look at whether we can, in fact, make that happen, whether we have a viable implementation strategy for that course of action. If you think back to the slide where I talked about guidance changing from residential to industrial in a couple of existing industrial areas, I think it's important to note that land use category is only a small piece of the story. And very important along with that is what kind of development character that would have. So in that example, for instance, we have the opportunity to talk about where we want heavy industrial versus light industrial activity. We can talk about what kinds of uses are appropriate next to the public realm. We can still pursue acquisition of the riverfront for a public edge. We can have destination parks within that area. We can build strong connections to the river. We could talk about design guidelines for private property that fronts public property. So those are the kind of things related to development character that we can still pursue. And we've started to think about that development character in these special neighborhoods for industrial property, for office areas, for residential property. The ones on this slide are just a small number of principles we think are overarching and would pertain to any new development and also existing development, if we can move existing development towards some of these things in these riverfront neighborhoods. So development character becomes very important. In terms of the relationship between the work we're doing related to development guidance and the work that you all are doing, there are a number of things that I think it's very important to note. From the time that the Riverfront Development Initiative got going, your design team and city staff have been working very closely together to talk about what's the relationship between these and to fine-tune our understanding what's the relationship between these things, to message these together. And there's just a couple of things I would call your attention to. One is that we've been more and more comfortable with talking about the complementarity of our work. The Minneapolis Riverfront Development Initiative is largely focused on the public realm. Our work is entirely focused on guiding private development of private property. There's been a lot of cross-fertilization in the process as both teams served to some extent on the technical teams of the other, and we had our own face-to-face meetings that were very substantive in terms of giving input to each other. We've used community engagement opportunities as a way to, at a minimum, provide information about the other efforts so that was out there when we had opportunity to go to the public, that there were more than one thing going on. We knew that it had a lot of potential for confusion, and I'm sure we did confuse a lot of people, at the end of the day. But we worked hard to provide information about the other study, and in some instances we even offered on a community engagement opportunity the other team to be part of the presentation. And as Bruce alluded to, our intent is in the next effort to fully integrate the findings that we come to and the City Council endorses with the designs that you end up advancing from the River First vision into a common policy document that again gives us a comprehensive and integrated vision for the city's upper riverfront. In terms of timeline, I talked about our research concluding over the next month or so, vetting some of those findings and recommendations internally. In January, I think we will be going through a formal process of not necessarily approving changes, but going to the City Council to ask for their direction about this next step, which, as I showed you, is a policy modification step. And then at that point in time in 2012, we expect to be working very closely with your staff on that plan modification document, however that ends up being structured or looking like. For more information, of course, we have a website. There are 3 research documents that are fairly extensive on that, and one that we haven't put on there but will be done in a couple of weeks, as well as the PowerPoints that we have brought to community meetings that are more detailed than the one I went through here. And I'm available for questions and comments, as is Bruce, I'm sure.
Comments? I believe Commissioner Vreeland was first.
Yes, I'm looking at the design pictures, and I'm looking at the transfer station, and I have the picture here if you want to try to project it. But It's a picture of folks loading their
That
kayaks.
looks like it's from the River First document.
Yes, so
Okay.
it's from the River First document, and it's folks loading their kayaks down the current ramp, which is part of the Minneapolis transfer station now. And again, this is probably the place most in conflict between your report and the design initiative, where 26th, 24th, 28th, and the potential land bridge or other bridges. So again, first of all, thank you and Hyla for doing all this work and working with the citizen engagement process. It was just astounding to have the Minneapolis Riverfront Partnership, the city, and the designers all engaged at the same time. So the whole complexity of what we're doing was being engaged. So again, I'm talking about the one place where these might be in conflict, or the place
Do
where
we have
the
a
most conflict.
ability to
occur.
put that on this screen, the River First plan? Do we have that
Just
here?
want
Okay.
this, or
We can talk in concept about it.
Yeah.
again, just for a visual image there, it's a place where the boathouse might be. There's a lot of industrial that can't be moved cheaply around that, but the River First was kind of to snake their way through it and have this node. And if you're going to have something that goes through at 26th, you need to have something at the end. So again, all this work, and this is a bonding request for us as well, 26 is a really important connection to the river. So again, just pointing
Commissioner Vreeland, I agree with you about the importance of that connection. And there's a lot of city support and there's a lot of community support for that particular feature. It started out a Farview land bridge feature and still potentially could include a land bridge. I guess I don't necessarily agree that there's an inherent conflict here. The fact that the area may stay industrial in character, a part of the area may stay industrial in character versus residential in character over the long run, does not mean that we can't pursue in conjunction acquisitions for boat dock, for destination park. We'll be refining those visions, but those can certainly happen within an industrial area as well as they can in a residential area. Is that
Yeah, and again, parks can occur in any zoning, but again, what do we actually have there? It will be the big question.
Sure.
Commissioner Breland, if I could add just a little bit, what we've done in the River First plan is really look at a phasing strategy that allows us in the first phase over the next number of years to focus really on publicly owned land, and that, in this case, the area that you're talking about is 26th Avenue, and the way that 26th Avenue meets the river, and really look at focusing our energies and our investment dollars on that publicly owned corridor, and then having patience over time to realize kind of the full vision of the River First plan in that area, and that would be ultimately conversion of currently industrial lands to open space in some cases, or working with industrial users to green their sites and make them available as part of the recreational and interpretive matrix of the river corridor in this area. So I think we see this really as a phased approach where we today focus in on what we can do, and then we have patience over time in looking at properties, whether they're owned by the city or owned by other private industrial users, for either transformation into an open space component or working with them to make that a more coherent connection between recreation, open space, and industrial use.
I appreciate that, and it's certainly not easy to move a transfer station, but it is publicly owned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Vreeland. Commissioner Young's next, and then after that we'll be going to open time.
You need to go back, Tom, to one of your slides, like the fourth or fifth slide of a map. No, there, well, that'll work. Down under 18, down there at 8th and Plymouth, which is our share site. How come it's purple?
Is this the old plan? or-
The
Is it
Shear
the
Brothers
old?
site is, right, as part of Area 18. The Above the Falls plan calls for that to remain industrial / office park. That's why it's purple.
So how are we gonna go about changing that?
Don't have to.
We don't have to, if we're gonna put in,
Assistant Superintendent Chamberlain.
well, okay.
We
Doesn't
can-
seem like swimming is a real, industrial use.
We can put a park on any zone within the city. So the underlying zoning doesn't necessarily matter with the enjoyment as a park.
Okay, I'm gonna let this go. It's above my head, obviously. All right.
I'm going to ask one quick question related to that. If we wanted to put a recreational amenity and it's in conflict with the zoning, is there an issue then?
A recreational.
Talking about a building like a restaurant.
Oh, right. Well, everything that we've contemplated with the Shear Park site, including the possibility of development that would kind of back the park, all fits within the zoning that is both existing and contemplated for that area. So even if we were interested in doing supportive development on the edge of the park, such as restaurants or even an office component, that all fits with the zoning that the city has contemplated for that site.
Okay. We're going to have to go to open time. Thank you very much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.